And Uriah, remind me of the name of your group practice.
Intune Family Counseling.
That's right. Okay, so Uriah, you got Intune Family Counseling going. I think it's just great as we're starting here. I wanted to kind of, touch base. You're another group practice owner. You guys are up in Northern California. And we've known each other for a little bit now. We've done some retreats together and kind of talked business together. And I don't know where you'd like to start or how you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, for sure. This is exciting to be talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I get to talk to you is a good time.
Yeah.
So, yes, who is Uriah Guilford? I am a retired therapist and a soon-to-be retired group practice owner.
Okay.
And I could talk about that if you want.
Sure.
And then I'm also the founder of Productive Therapist, which is a virtual assistant company that serves therapists in private practice. So definitely have lots of interests, creative business interests. And I've been doing this group practice thing for 10 years.
10 years. Yeah. And you've always struck me as somebody who likes to think about how to do something in a new way. And definitely far from being like a Luddite, let's say, whatever the opposite of that is. You seem like you like trying out something new. The idea of trying to help therapists, with a virtual assistant and delegate, unload, think systemically about how to think about your workflow or how to make your career work for you. Can you speak a little bit to that about kind of your interest in that area?
Definitely. I kind of like the word technologist or tech enthusiast. That is definitely describes me for a long time. Very interested in technology and also how to use various different tools to automate, systematize, and just make life better. And that's either because I'm very ambitious and I want to get a lot of things done, or because I'm very lazy and I want to find the easiest way.
Maybe both.
A little bit of both, probably. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I sort of fell into a fascination with delegation and automation as a part of my group practice journey when there became, more and more things to do and more complicated kind of systems within my business. But then also I just have a fascination with showing my wife how to use the latest version of iOS and how to do cool things, showing my kids how to do cool things with technology that just makes life a little bit easier, a little bit more fun. So I think I'm endlessly fascinated in that for all kinds of different applications.
Yeah. Well, do you remember what the first thing was that you thought, okay, how do I take this off my plate as a practice owner, even in your own private practice or even for your other clinicians? Do you remember what that first thing was that you tried to take off?
Yes. Honestly, it was the therapy work.
Wow.
Because I grew a very successful solo practice where I had a bit of a wait list and lots of demand for people who wanted to work with me. And I maxed out. I think personally I maxed out at seeing 28 clients in 1 week. And I was an absolute zombie after that. And I thought, this is not good. This is not sustainable, right? And yet there were still a lot of families. Specifically, my focus was working with teenage boys and their families. And they kept calling. They kept coming to me. So that's kind of what spurred the starting of the group practice. And I thought, I just can't do all this work. I can't help all the people that need help. So how do I solve that problem? And it seemed like the best idea was to find other competent, passionate family therapists that could also work alongside me. So that was probably the very first thing. As far as the service delivery goes, when it comes to administrative tasks or back office kinds of things, it would probably be something different. But that's my first answer.
Yeah, I think that's interesting when you get to a point where stress-wise, let's say you're taking on too much, and there can be a spiral that you can get into when you take on too much, and then because you've got tunnel vision and you're exhausted, you can't imagine how things could be different or how you could restructure your life in some way, and it becomes baked in and exhausted. And I think that's a recipe for burnout. And then here's this other space in your mind, which is, I think, probably a more creative space that goes, how could something be different? How could I redesign this? How could I reframe it? And what would I need in order to build into that? Who would I need to hire, or what systems would I need to put in place? And I think that kind of shift is something that, as good as it is, can be really I don't know that everybody experiences that shift when they're overwhelmed, is going, okay, how do I kind of engage this creative part of my mind and start to see a new future as a response to the stress. I think a lot of people end up just shutting down and going, I just need to change direction, or
work harder,
work harder, or some kind of way that you kind of almost like, keep kicking the spurs into the horse, to keep it going, rather than trying to be smart about it and think, how do I do this long term?
Definitely. One of my favorite phrases is that therapists flirt with burnout. And we're not unique to that. Lots of professionals, lots of people do that, sort of like push things to the edge. I think the saying is burn the candle at both ends, right? And that's a common human experience. But we certainly do that as helping professionals, and it's not beneficial. And you're right, not everybody hits that spot and comes to the conclusion that they need to do things differently, get more help, or do something about that. And that's dangerous, because mental health providers specifically, and all health and wellness providers, are important. And like the people who we help need us to be, in a good place in our life and our emotions and our psychology, so we can continue to be there for them. So it really is critical. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so can you say a little bit more about your virtual assistant program? How did that, or where is that now? What's the situation with that?
Where is it now? It's still growing in year 7. Yes. And this was an accident, I would say. Like, for some reason, many of my successes, not an accident. I will take some credit for the things that I've accomplished, but it was unexpected, I'll say. So I never intended to start a virtual assistant business. That was not my intention. But what happened is I just had a need for part-time administrative support, because I was in the position of doing all the things for my business: marketing, networking, service delivery, accounting, cleaning the stains out of the carpet, answering all the emails and phone calls. And like I said before, flirting with burnout, I thought, this is not good. I'm working so much. And so I ended up actually hiring a friend to come in and handle the intake department, as it were. And then I realized after a little bit of time that I had other colleagues that were also friends, specifically my friend Fiacre O'Sullivan in San Francisco, who needed an intake coordinator, but part-time, like 5, 10, 20 hours a month, right? Yeah. And I thought, well, I've got this great person. They could also help some of my friends. Yeah. And that's kind of how that started. And then it's just grown since then. Yeah. That's great. And I think, again, that's like something where it's hard to make that shift for a lot of therapists, where they go, I'm just going to go hire somebody. On the other side of it, you go, man, what's the cost of not doing that? If you are the one who's answering the phones, doing everything, then what is the stress? What is the opportunity cost that you line up? If you're the one writing all the blogs, doing all the, whatever it is, answering all the phones, there's also other work that you're not being paid to do well if you're doing those things. But I think that's a hard transition. And then speaking of automation, I thought we could talk, and you brought up this article that was incredibly interesting about AI therapists. And I think this is just something important to discuss, as much as I just want to bury my head in the sand and not think about it or talk about it. It's upon us, and there's an incredibly huge infancy stage of AI that's developing that is already showing some really interesting applications and results with therapy. And so, I don't know, how do you want to start talking about that? Yeah, it would be interesting to talk about the application of artificial intelligence in delivering services and support to people, therapeutic services. And then if we want to talk about like the sort of business applications, or other ways to use those tools to kind of make life and business better. But it's super interesting. I'm not an expert in this by any means, but like I said, I'm a tech enthusiast, so I'm listening, paying attention, reading things, trying to figure out how this is going to affect both of my businesses and our industry as far as the mental health industry goes. And people are divided, and people have strong opinions. Yeah. And it's just a very interesting time to be alive. So I'm paying attention to that. With the sort of, my view is I'm kind of optimistic about technology, and innovations. Like when you look back over the innovations that have happened in the past, whether it's literally the printing press or the telephone, the radio, all the way to the smartphone and the personal computer, like it's always been a scary time, and people said, this is going to change everything. I don't think, this is going to really hurt humanity, right? And in most of those cases, the opposite was true. We adapted and we found out ways to use the radio, for example, to benefit humanity. Of course, in every one of those times, I think it felt different, and people said, well, this is nothing like what happened before, right? Mm-hmm. So it is. It's uncertain, and it's kind of scary to see what's going to happen, for sure.
Yeah. So tell us about the study.
Yeah, so to be honest, I just read this week, and then I shared it with you, and I've been like talking to people about it because it's fascinating. So I think this is one of the first clinical trials that's come out that's showing the potential efficacy of AI chatbots for providing therapy, or quote unquote therapy, right?
Yeah.
And this is a study that came out of Dartmouth, which as far as I know is still a pretty prestigious school, right? I think. Yeah. And it was published in a journal just less than 30 days ago.
Wow.
And it's interesting because what they did, kind of a small study, right? But they took 106 participants. These were people who had major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, or potentially at risk for eating disorders. I think that was the focus. And it was an 8-week period. And they used this, what they call Therabot, through a smartphone app. So essentially an AI chatbot that has been in development since, I think, 2019. So this is not like something they came up with last week and they just decided to unleash it on a clinical trial.
Yeah, okay.
And they took, I don't know if it was half, but they took, there was a control group. So those people didn't get any treatment, therapy, or medication. And then the other folks just got to use, on an unlimited basis, this chatbot, right?
Yeah.
And the results were interesting. Like when I read this, I was like, this is not what I would have guessed would have happened. If you and I were talking like 3 months ago and we said like, so chatbots as a therapist, can it replace a therapist? I would say no.
Yeah.
I don't know what you would say.
No, I would have said no.
Right. Definitely. And I think the answer, to be honest, still is no, right? There's nothing that can replace Connor or Uriah. Like we're pretty awesome.
Oh, thanks.
Well, we're humans, right? We have that going.
Yeah. Yeah, that helps.
But the actual outcomes that this study was showing, early stages, right? But they're showing basically symptom reduction of around, for depression, 51%, anxiety, 31%, and eating disorders, 19% average reduction in body image and weight concerns, right? So apparently if you compare that to the average outcomes for individual therapy with a person, with a human therapist, it's about the same, which is kind of shocking.
That is very shocking. So 50% reduction in depressive symptoms.
51, right.
51.
Right.
And then 30-something% for anxiety symptoms.
Yes.
And then what was the eating disorder one?
19% for some reason. 19% it was lower.
19%
right.
for eating disorder, which is also a lot harder to treat too.
It
is an eating disorder. And so they are comparing these two groups, one that didn't receive any treatment and then another one that received just unfettered access to an AI chatbot.
Right.
And so this chatbot, what were the kind of things that it's trained to do? Did you have examples of that from the study? What kinds of responses did it give, or how does it approach that?
I didn't dig into that too much, but it looks like it was not just open access to like generative AI, as in like, ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. This chatbot was trained on apparently evidence-based protocols, so CBT, DBT, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what else it was trained on, but it was basically given a bunch of information about standardized treatment protocols, right? And then it was also monitored by the research team so that they could actually see what was being asked, what the chatbot was saying, so they could intervene if they needed to. So they were trying to do this in the safest way possible. And it was also prompted or created to, if there's suicidality or some sort of risk, concerns about risk, then it would prompt them to call 911, go to the local emergency room, kind of like a human therapist would do. So they were watching all of that closely to make sure it was as safe as possible. But it kind of just seems like standardized, evidence-based treatment protocols was the foundation level of this
So these students, they'll say something like, "Oh, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling depressed," and then the chatbot will respond, "Well, what are some thoughts you have when you think about your sadness, or what are some ways that you might take care of yourself today?" Like there's like this kind of response similar maybe to what a CBT therapist might say in those situations. Okay, so would you or have you or would you use a service like that?
So I have two sort of anecdotal stories for you. The answer is yes. I definitely want to try it. And there's a particular one.
Yeah.
I'll tell you off the recording which one this is, because I haven't tested it, so I don't want to necessarily recommend it.
Right.
But I do want to test this to see what the experience is like, and how it compares, because there's clearly things that humans are better at than AI, and there's clearly things that AI is currently better at than humans. Mm-hmm. So interesting. So I guess I'll give you two sort of little stories, right? So I had a difficult parenting conundrum that I was facing with my 16-year-old daughter, right?
Yeah.
A difficult conversation that I needed to have with her, essentially like a boundary that I needed to set around something that she was asking for, right? And so I did. I went to ChatGPT and I said, how should I respond to this situation with my daughter? And how can I have this conversation with her? And it was actually very helpful. It gave me some reflections. It gave me some ideas. And then it also spit out a script that I could use. If you need to have this conversation with your daughter, here's a script for you, right?
Uh-huh.
And did I use the script? No, I'm a trained therapist. I know how to talk to my daughter. Well, most of the time. But it was helpful in sort of brainstorming. I was kind of using it like a parent coach, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And I found that quite helpful. And then I went and had that conversation with her, and fortunately it went really well. And I was like, okay, that was useful. Yeah.
Okay. So just to add something to that, through this recording software that we're using, you can actually input text, and because it listens to podcast recordings all the time of you, it will generate the text back in your voice. So, you could have put in this script that you were given from the chatbot, and it might have read it in your voice to your daughter. This is where there's something really, really interesting here about what's being constructed through all these things, these interactions, right? For example, let's say you gave this to your daughter, and then she goes, "I don't know what to do with what my dad said to me," and then she goes on ChatGPT and puts in the input, and now you got two ChatGPTs, talking to each other. It's
talking
kind of
to each other, right?
Okay, but to come back to what I hear there, it's like it's a tool, and you go, "I'm not quite sure what to do with this," and it's like this wonderful backboard that you can use. And of course, if something doesn't feel right, you're not going to use it. But just like going to a dictionary or an encyclopedia, where you have a backboard in order to kind of suss out something or to work something out, there's something incredibly efficient about this that is both scary but also incredibly powerful, and in this case worked out really well. Something I'm curious about too, and I think you could probably make the same criticism of some therapies as well, is, for example, let's say you have unfettered access to the program, right? And you go, wow, it was therapeutic because there was a reduction in symptoms. Now you take the program away. Is there an enduring effect? Sometimes in a testing protocol, you'll do like an AB test, where you don't just do before and after. You do before the treatment, during the treatment, and then you have another period of time where the treatment is taken away, and you see, does the effect still endure? And I think it's a wonderful test of how therapeutic something is. For example, if you go, I'm going to take ibuprofen every day for 30 days, and look, my back pain went away. Well, when I take away the ibuprofen, does my back pain come back? And if so, what do we say about the therapeutic effect of that? I think and I want to be careful, because I think that same criticism can be levied at a lot of different therapies, not just an AI one. For example, they talk about longitudinal effects of strict CBT manualized therapy versus looking at a variable like the warmth of a clinician, or even if they are still a CBT therapist. And they see that actually the connection between the therapist and the client is what promotes the lasting change even after therapy ends. right? So you're going to CBT and you feel good, you feel good, you feel good. And then let's say you stop going to your therapist. Some people will return and feel depressed again. Other people will continue to feel good or improve. And those are the people who usually have like an actual felt connection or relationship with their therapist. And that relationship is what helps them internalize the capacities that they're going to need later on in their life. And so I'm curious about that, about like, okay, let's say you cut off the access to the bot, for example. Is that still an enduring capacity that I've learned and that I can now use on my own? Or is it something that fosters continued dependence on the interactive tool?
That is a very interesting point. And the other day I was working through something internally, and I thought about my last therapist who I worked with for some time. And he was very helpful to me in many ways. His name was David, really great guy. And I actually literally thought to myself, if I was talking to my previous therapist about this, what would David say?
Wow.
And what would his, how would he talk me through this? And so I have definitely internalized some of the things that some of the things that came from our work together. And I found it very helpful, because I was like, this is exactly what he would say. And you know what, that's actually right. That's a really good counterpoint to like what I'm thinking and feeling right now.
Yeah.
And so the question is, would I have that same sort of experience if I had gotten that benefit from a computer or a machine, right?
So what's happening there?
I don't know.
When you actually hold that, your therapist in your mind, and by the way, I have the same experience from my years with my therapist and I still see him, but when I'm going through something, he'll come to my mind. When I'm upset or when I'm worried about something, or, when I'm seeing my own clients, like his face and voice will kind of be there with me. And that's not just something that happens in therapy. That's just what human relationships do to form ourself, right? Like we are built from these composite, experiences of relationship with other people who are close with us, that we share attachment bonds with. And those things become capacities that we use in our lives to survive difficult times and to get through, or to parent our daughters and sons. And, and then you go, is there something like that happens in a chatbot situation? I don't know. In the study, they talked about how there was a subjective comment that people were interacting with the chatbot as if they were friends with it.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, and you go, okay, so what's happening there? Are they able to internalize the chatbot as a friend who, even when they stop using the chatbot, they're still able to pull that wisdom to mind? Or is it some other kind of thing that's happening? I think that's a fascinating thought.
It is. I read also in that study that the participants reported a level of trust and communication with Therabot comparable to working with a human therapist. So that is interesting. And it seems like, and I'll tell you this too, like I said, I read a lot of comments on Facebook and LinkedIn about people talking about AI therapy and all these kinds of different things. It's fascinating. And I saw where a couple of therapists actually sort of, it's kind of vulnerable, but they kind of admitted that they had a cathartic experience with an AI therapist or an AI chatbot. And they said that it was really helpful. And I thought, that's so interesting. And I think from what I could read into that, it was based on the depth of the questions, like the sort of places that it guided them to, consider things and reflect on things.
Yeah.
So I think that is fascinating, and I think there's a huge application there, but it won't ever be the same thing as connecting with a person and feeling seen and heard and accepted. Because, I don't know if you were ever a fan of Irvin Yalom, but he's one of my sort of therapy heroes. And he, I learned from him that it's the relationship that heals a person, right? In multiple contexts, not just therapy. But I still believe that. Yeah. And so I still think that is really, really important. And one of the outcomes of the study, not the outcomes, but one of the things that they said was that there's a huge opportunity here for AI bots and agents to be helpful in a therapeutic sense and work alongside therapists. Like these things can go together. It's not like, the AI is going to take the job of the therapist at the moment, and hopefully in the near future, but it can be helpful.
Yeah, I wonder, well, even when you say that of, it's therapist is irreplaceable, is there a counter argument to that?
Yes.
Why? What is it that we're really saying is important about it actually being a real person who's helping you through something? Why is that helpful? Why can't you, for example, have a relationship to an AI chatbot that's been with you for years and that knows you from talking with you a long time? Why should it have to be a human to be the therapist? And why might that be categorically different?
Right.
I just, not that I believe that, but I think asking the question helps us to try to locate something maybe innately human that we maybe don't want to lose in the middle of the technology of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah. So which side are you arguing for?
Oh,
Are you?
No, I'm just posing the question of okay, so let's say you say, well, it's humans are irreplaceable, as you can't really have a human therapist. You can't really replace a therapist. And I guess I'm saying, why not?
Sure.
You said it's the relationship that heals, but that still feels a little bit like a very broad stroke.
Definitely. Yeah. And
why should it have to be a relationship that heals a person rather than, let's say, a chatbot? I don't know.
Yeah, that is super interesting. So recently I made the decision. Okay, so to respond to what you just said, I think from the standpoint of mental health providers, I think this feels like an existential threat, right?
Yeah.
So if the studies all say, guess what? People like chatbots, people like AI therapists, they actually find them better. In fact, they're not worried about them judging, or they can access them any time of day or night. So there's really no countertransference. Some of the problems with a human therapist are gone. So if those things become more and more true, then it's like, well, what am I still valuable? Am I still important as a therapist? Do people still want my services and to pay me for my time? So I think that feels like an existential threat, right?
Yeah.
But to play the other side of the coin, I recently decided, a lot of people are saying, well, you can never replace the human connection of a therapist. It's never going to happen. It's never going to be the same, right? And so I decided, just as, I don't know what you call it, devil's advocate, or just playing the other side. Okay, well, what if I come at it from the perspective of no, absolutely. Yeah, AI is going to replace doctors, therapists, and other professionals, lawyers, for example, just to use a couple examples. Okay, so if I take that to be an inevitable truth, it may not be, but if I take that position, then what does that change? How do I make decisions based on my career, or, how I get support for myself and for my family, those kinds of things? I think it's an interesting kind of way to think about it. What if what if that's an inevitability?
What if that is? And there's the analogy I'm thinking of as we're talking about this is horse owners in the year 1900, and them saying, well, it's an electric, or it's a gas powered car, but it doesn't breathe and have its own mind like a horse does. So nobody's really going to fall for this car thing. I don't know if that's how they thought about it, but kind of don't worry, you guys, people are still going to be riding horses. And then you go, well, they are, but it's not the same. They're obviously, we still have horses as a huge part of our culture, but it doesn't need to be used for transportation in order to be valuable. There's a different function for a horse today than there was that many years ago. And so I'm coming back to that analogy of does it need to be living and breathing and moving? Well, yes, for a certain experience, but maybe for a lot of our depression and anxiety, we don't need to see a therapist, just like you don't need to ride a horse in order to get from city to city, anymore. You have a car, it's okay. But that doesn't mean that you don't ever want a therapist, to help you through something, an actual person. I don't know. I wonder if that's like an analogy we could use, because you're talking about technology, the way that technology is always same thing with candles. It's not like, Yankee candles still exist, right? Is that what they're called? But but back in the day, it was like you just had to buy tons of candles all the time. It's not like they don't exist anymore, but they serve a different function because there's a light bulb. I wonder if it's something similar with some of these things that AI will continue to evolve into.
I think those are really good analogies. Yeah. And my prediction, I'm not necessarily one that's good about predicting the future at all, but my prediction currently is that there will be a time in the not too distant future where good treatment, call it evidence-based, call it whatever you want to call it, good treatment will look like human therapists working together with AI to help you solve your problems. And I think consumers at some point, just regular people, will want a therapist that is using AI over a therapist who's not. That's just a prediction. It could be wrong, but I think that could be true, because some of we could talk about specifics if you want, but some of the ways that AI it's kind of scary to use this word, but augmenting therapy and the therapist, it's very interesting. It's very interesting, and it's potentially very, very helpful. And also, like, another thing is, I could see how you and I and everyday people will have actually several agents that they interact with. So they'll have their life coach, they'll have their personal trainer, they'll have their therapist, they'll have a sort of a host of supportive AI agents that kind of guide them through life, and they're all accessible.
They're on C3PO.
Yeah, right. They're all accessible on your phone, with your earbuds, and then in the future in other ways through Neuralink implants in your brain. I mean, that's terrifying, right? But I think it's good. I think it might very well happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder about that. Yeah. You're right. It's hard to kind of predict where it goes. I think here's the counter argument in me as I go. And again, it's not so much specific to AI, but a situation where I had a client who had a in between sessions, he had a question about what to do in some relationship in his life, and he ends up using AI to try to give him some thoughts. I mean, it's similar to you, right? And there's a part of me when he said that, I kind of wanted to suggest that next time when he had a thought like that, instead of using the AI, that he just paused and trusted himself and goes, just, sit there and let the moment come to you. You don't have to look outside of yourself. You don't have to gather more information, and it's not about that at all. There's a centering that needs to happen, or an expansion that needs to happen, that is being mimicked by AI, of like, I need to access the cloud network, of human knowledge, that sounds good in that moment, but there's a different kind of expansion into, the history of times that you've received care, other mentors, what is right, or what you ascend to, either spiritually or personally. Is there enough inside of you already to do it? And what happens if we have this perspective that it's always outside of me? And here's where I think that a human therapist is different, is that they aren't accessible all the time.
Right.
You do have a boundary where you go, I'm not actually going to be able to hold your hand. And here was why that's important. Don't we believe this, where we go, as therapists, don't we believe this, that it's actually important, for example, for a borderline client who experiences rejection all the time, to actually know that there's an end to the session, and that they're not going to be able to just reach out to you all the time. They're going to have to wait until next session, and the therapist says, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay until we meet again, and I trust that you'll know what to do. Here's what you do in an emergency, right? But what happens if we never have to let go of the teddy bear, so to speak, or we never have to let go of mom and dad? We can always be clinging to their leg, in the sense that we never have to figure out within ourselves, not never, but that whenever we have something hard, we have the ability to not have to figure out for ourselves what the right path is, and to even have to experiment and to make a mistake on it and to not know. I just worry about, like, for example, OCD clients or highly anxious clients who might look outside of themselves always and go, oh, this is therapeutic. Unfettered access to the to the, therapy chatbot, unfettered access means they are, relying it on an extent to where they're never having to now pause, put the thing down, and see if they can still, have a date with a girl without having to know how they should plan that time or how they should ask questions. And are those important things that we have to figure out as humans, or is it okay for us to not have to go through that deprivation where we have to internalize a new capacity? I think that's the Luddite in me, I guess. That's the counter argument that I have to the AI thing, that I just wonder about, from a more broad standpoint.
Yeah, it could absolutely be a negative sort of dependence on the tech that would be problematic for some people and then not others, right?
Yeah.
But I think what you're talking about is the ability to access and utilize internal resources, whatever those resources might be, in the place of external resources. So I think that's an important human capability. But also, like, my daughter never goes anywhere without her phone, right? So is she reliant and dependent on the technology already? Yeah, but me too.
Exactly. Right. So it's not just strictly an AI thing, right? It's more of a, there's a larger thing going on there. Yeah. This is what
absolutely.
Jonathan Haidt talks about, with like the whole, social media technology generation, is that you have already, before AI, a temptation to just be constantly in an enmeshed relationship where you never have to explore. Mm-hmm. There's no trying and failing and experiencing. There's a much more safe virtual world that we've become accustomed to working things out in.
That is an unfortunate consequence. Yeah. One thing that I wanted to bring up that I think is applicable to this conversation is the accessibility, essentially, the shortage of providers, both medical and behavioral health, right? Mm-hmm. So a statistic that I came across said that for every available provider in the United States, there's an average of 1,600 patients with depression or anxiety alone. Mm. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. We're not necessarily pumping out therapists quicker than we were before, and the population is growing, but maybe not growing as much as it could. But I think there's going to continue to be a shortage of providers. And then there's accessibility with the cost of therapy, both people having insurance to use, that insurance coverage being good, and then also the ability to pay out of pocket for those services.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think there's a way that, artificial intelligence tools can be, obviously they're more scalable. They're infinitely scalable. There's some limits, but they're scalable and they're cheap, quote unquote. So a lot of folks could get some level of care, so that instead of getting no care or getting the best care, they're getting some care.
Yeah,
and I think that's possibly the best application that I can think of, right? And people who would traditionally not seek out a therapist,
right?
Fill in the blank, whoever you might think of, maybe personality disorders or any other kinds of folks. If it's in their pocket and they could, ask a question that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable asking another person,
that
could be really helpful. Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Definitely.
You go, what's the difference between that and then not having that tool and still having people in the same social situation? It's so crazy to think about that there's a shortage of mental health providers. Maybe another way of just conceptualizing that problem is that there is just this huge surge of depression and anxiety culturally and systemically, and there's just an insufficient response of just going, well, everyone ought to be in therapy. Like there's likely a much more upstream solution to that, but like you said, but that doesn't change the fact that hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people are anxious, depressed, and here you have something where you go clinically, the results are in, it's like it actually is helpful. It's better than not having it, is what the study is saying.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows where it's going to go from here? But I think one of the things that's true is that, I'm thinking to myself, is that true? Is that, humans will always need some sort of emotional, psychological support because life is hard. We all have difficult things that we go through, and it's painful to be alone with your thoughts and your experiences. So I think we'll always crave connection, companionship, and validation, et cetera, right? But what that looks like and how that is acquired, I guess, could be very different. And then we're not even talking about like augmented reality and virtual reality and all these kinds of different things. Have you ever read or seen the book Ready Player One, or seen that movie?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Where he has the whole bodysuit.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like in a future scenario where basically the earth is ruined and everybody lives in virtual reality because it's the only place that's, where you can like connect with people and things are actually the way you would think they should be. And people wear these entire bodysuits that give them the physical sensations of experiencing things in the real world, quote unquote real world. Yeah, I know, it's pretty crazy to go back and revisit that and think, and then also go watch the movie WALL-E from Pixar, right? And think about, remember that? Where all the people are like just permanently in these little pods where they're cruising around, sipping on their soda, getting their food delivered to them and watching content 24/7
on a big cruise ship.
Terrifying. Yeah. Truly.
Yeah, no, I think that's like, there's something that is equally intriguing and captivating that we long for, of like the fantasy escape place, or the thing where we don't have to expend any effort. We just have everything on our fingertips. It's easy as pressing a button, in both the WALL-E and the Ready Player One example. That's the enticement. That's what makes people go into the world, is that it's a sandbox and there's no real consequence and there's no real effort or cost. I guess maybe there's a cost associated, just like any game where there's like, trade-offs and things like that. But then there's also the eerie feeling about it of like, what are we losing touch with? In both those examples that you're giving, it's paralleled with a world that is needing the interaction, needing the human interaction, that is, and instead it's neglected. The earth is neglected in both situations, while the attention of all the humans who ought to be caring for it is focused on this other world. And I think there's something terrifying about that as well, of, what happens to our home, our literal homes, our communities, our friendships, our relationships, if we turn inward that way and neglect the outside world of relationships, the world of whatever, the physical world around us. I think there's like some kind of parable in there.
Absolutely there is, yeah. And I'll tell you this, even though I'm a tech enthusiast, I still love analog experiences. I love like riding with a fountain pen, putting my feet in the grass, walking through a forest, like the sensation of like pulling out my leather wallet, so like I very much want to live in the real world and experience life in many different ways. And the technology and the tools are useful, but they're not the entirety of human experience, unfortunately.
No, maybe, and I think that's maybe the image that I'm sure you had when you thought about, I'm overwhelmed, I need to delegate or think differently about this, is maybe trying to make room for something much more human, connected, secure, when, there can be this thing where, if we're not careful, it gets crowded out. I think with technology, there's a double-edged sword there always of, how much is it engrossing your attention, and then how much is it opening up your attention to something else, I think that's always a thing that we have to consider. Yeah.
I had one other experience I'll share with you recently that contrasts these two things that we're talking about. So I was having a challenge that I was trying to figure out how to solve in my business. And so I thought, well, what should I do about this? And I thought of one of my friends who's we're in a group together where we kind of help each other work on our businesses, right? You and I have done that before, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know what, I need to call Whitney and see what she thinks about this. Because I kind of needed some advice, but I also needed some emotional support, if I'm being honest, right? Because this was a difficult thing. But Whitney was on vacation with her family and was unavailable. So I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And I was actually driving to work, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to talk to ChatGPT, because I don't know if you've used this feature, but you can turn on the voice feature and you can have an audio conversation with the chatbot. And I've done this before, and it was really helpful for brainstorming and just kind of going back and forth on whatever topic. And so I was like, I'm going to talk to ChatGPT about this business problem and see if I can make some progress, right? And after about, I would say 4 minutes, 5 minutes, I was just like, this is not helpful. I turned it off, and it kind of felt soulless and empty to me, because I was in my mind, I was kind of contrasting this with, like, I would really wish I was talking to Whitney about this right now, but here I am talking to the chatbot, which is basically nameless and doesn't really know me or at some point the AI chatbots will know a lot more about us. They now have more memory than they had before, where they can recall things that you've talked about before. But in this situation, I turned it off because I was like, no, this is not doing the trick, right? So unsatisfying is the word I would use.
Right. Well, but you're also talking to the Super Nintendo version of what will be ChatGPT 5 or ChatGPT 6, ChatGPT 20. Right. But yeah, there's something that pops up though in the disappointment of the response that can feel, I'm sure, like a bit of loneliness. Like, wait, like, I don't know if this is the satisfying interaction that I was looking for, but also soulless. Like it feels a little bit pithy or empty.
Right.
Like, yeah, I can picture that too. I mean, just with some ways that I've used Grok, I use Grok mostly, but the ways that I've used that, where you go, in some ways it's incredibly intelligent, in other ways you ask it to do something and it feels very wooden and soulless, generalized. I don't know what ends up getting reduced if you just live in that world. But then also, like you said, there's some kind of like, and I wonder if that ties into that other day I was saying earlier about just going to the ChatGPT, where there might have been something more expansive, in that same conversation inside your head, of being able to just sit with the problem and wonder about it, as opposed to getting the answer. As much as I like getting those answers too, go again, like what is that space, and what ends up being, let's say, reduced about our awareness if we just go to something like that. I don't know. But all to say, like you said, I do agree that, like, generally you go, when people are able to receive that kind of feedback or that kind of help with common problems, ideally, kind of like delegating, it opens people up to being able to address larger issues in their life that they wouldn't have been able to address if they're on level 0, without help, depressed, isolated, anxious. If ChatGPT or whatever process, Therabot, can help people figure out how to get through a day and not be overwhelmed, or it can help them, clean their room or do a nighttime routine so they can sleep better. If they can do those things, then what other possibilities might open up for those people? Just like what other possibilities open up when we have cars or trains or, all these other things that help us move farther. Collectively, there's something else that opens up. And I think that's a good thing. But yeah. Yeah.
I think this is true of you. It's definitely true of me. I have pre-internet memories. Like I have life experiences that took place before the internet. Right. And my kids don't have that. Yeah. And my grandchildren and your grandchildren will not have pre-AI memories. So when they're, however old they are, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, our grandkids might be handed a device that has, like you said, unfettered access to AI. And so that's just going to be their reality, right? And how is that going to change things? I don't know. That's very, very interesting, right?
Very interesting.
Yeah. What does it mean to be human?
What does it mean to be human when there are so many things, again, not just AI, that can close down our awareness of ourselves, that can close down and automate something, as opposed to opening ourselves up to something within ourselves, something between each other. What happens to a friend, for example, when you reach out to a friend and ask for help and they feel like you care and that you want them in your life. If we don't have any needs like that, then what does it mean to be human with each other? I think that's an interesting question.
I will point something out, that if you had an AI version of Connor, right, that was trained on everything you've ever written or said, and like potentially your therapy sessions, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But that AI version, if I was chatting with AI Connor, right, then that AI would say, hey, Uriah, why don't you take a minute and shut me down and think about this and just look inside yourself.
Interesting.
Right? And don't you think?
Yeah.
So the AI could very much guide that process.
I don't really want to answer that question for you. I think you can do it. You know?
Yeah.
So Uriah, I think you can handle this problem. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Remember what we talked about last week? You know.
So there's two prompts that I tested this last week specifically with ChatGPT that I think are very interesting. The one that's kind of just funny is you can say, like, based on everything you know about me, you know, roast me. Like so that one's just humorous, right? But if you've been using ChatGPT for a little while and it does have some memory of your conversations, or if you have that turned on, you can say, you know, what are my greatest strengths and weaknesses, or you know, please just based on what you know about me, describe me. And I did that recently, and like the level of insight that it gives you, you know, like what are my flaws and how can I work on them? Like because it knows everything that you've asked it about you, it's actually very, very insightful. Probably significantly better than if you asked your best friend. Like they would have good answers, but the level of detail and insight and depth, it's super interesting. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Man,
try asking Grok.
I'm kind of scared to try that. Yeah.
What are my flaws, or what do you know about me? What kind of person am I? You know?
Right. Oh my gosh. Wow. That'd be interesting, huh?
It is.
Well, this is something that I think I'm sure it'll keep evolving and we'll keep revisiting as it goes. But I just think it's so important to take a look at those things and to think about what does it mean, because honestly, I think a lot of the therapy that we do is therapy that could be done by a chatbot.
Right.
Ideally, I think it raises the bar for what we think we're capable of as therapists or as humans to relate to others and to heal, and to move away from things that are only requiring a manualization of a therapy process, or only requiring basic understandings of categorical diagnoses in the DSM, and more towards a much more, you know, rigorous approach to therapy that I think would challenge us. So all to say, I hope it challenges us to be better than a bot at what we do, and I certainly feel that for myself, of wanting to know, you know, what does it actually mean to be in the healing profession, more than a manualized treatment. But yeah.
That would be a good outcome. You should go buy betterthanabot.com right now.
Better than a bot. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Right, well,
this is an ongoing conversation for sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This is fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Uriah.